Who's that? Commander Claw. Who's bad? Commander Claw.
Welcome back to another episode of Breaking Brews. This is a deck tech on Storm, Force of Nature. This video is a shout out to a new subscriber, Tektronic. Love the comment, brother. Awesome. Great feedback. So, if you don't know what this is about, this is a Spellslinger deck for Storm Force of Nature. Spellslinging is my favorite type of mechanic in the world of Magic. And the main question for new players, what does it really do? What is Spellslinging? Spellslinging is generically casting as many spells as you would like. But I would like to change that, tweak that just a little bit, right? You're going to be playing a bunch of spells. Um, Actually, let me describe what it feels like. It's an addiction of playing a bunch of spells at either sorcery or instant speed. And you could have many strategies within, as in removal, and you're constantly ahead of your opponents by eliminating their threats before they can even set up. So it could be small removal spells that deal 1 damage to each opponent. But ironically, that 1 damage to each opponent is those little 1/1 white weenie creatures that they have on the battlefield that become 2/2s when the enchantment comes on the play that says creature tokens you control get +1/+1. See? Now you don't have a way to deal with 2/2s or these 3/3s or these 4/4s. So spell slinging could be many things, but I like to think of it as removal spells before opponents can get the set up. You're playing spells from your hand consistently that accelerate your game plan or reset the game plan. Like I love wheel effects, where you discard your hand and draw that many cards, either based on your opponents or other some kind of criteria. But without further ado, we are talking about Storm Force of Nature. This is a Spellslinger deck, so when you see the deck list in the description, make sure you review all those cards in there because they're going to be loaded with instant spells and sorcery spells. Most of them I would say are going to be removal, and you can do that very well in green. And red eliminates creatures and artifacts very well. And blue is pretty good for bounce spells. So you are going to be able to spell sling and disrupt your opponent's game plan quite often and keep Storm Force of Nature on the battlefield because these three colors, mainly blue and green, have also really good protection spells for your awesome commander. Without further ado, if you know what she does as in Storm Force of Nature's abilities, go ahead and skip to the first set of cards on the first timestamp. Otherwise, continue to watch. Thank you. Storm Force of Nature is a red, blue, green, 1 creature. That is temur colors, red, blue, and green. She's on a 3/4 body. She's a legendary creature, mutant hero. She has flying vigilance. That means she can't be blocked by creatures on the ground, and she doesn't tap to attack. That is vigilance. Her ability, Ceaseless Tempest. Whenever Storm deals combat damage to a player, the next instant or switch spell you cast this turn has Storm. That means when you cast it, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn. You may choose new targets for the copies. I'm going to assume this is not your first time discovering Storm and what she does. I'm pretty sure you watched other deck techs on how to play this commander. So essentially, before you go to combat, you want to cast a 1-drop spell that give her unblockable, flying, haste, something where you swing it for damage, right? Then you cast another spell before you go to damage, so you get your storm count up to 2, something along those lines. Then finally, when you attack, you cast that second or third spell, or maybe even more, after you do combat with her, and that when the storm count is super high and you make one of those explosive big plays. That's exactly what you want to do with her. However, with this spell singing deck, we're going to focus on a couple of cards, like the big spells that put the game away, which I just described after you attack with her and you have a high storm count. Some of these spells are going to be instant death, I would like to describe, depending on the criteria your opponent has. Because opponents get very comfortable playing their deck. I would like to say playing their deck. You know, they draw 2, 4, 6 cards, 8 cards randomly because they got some cool feature. Blah 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 blah. You've seen it happen before. But there's cards out there you can capitalize on your players being all trigger happy or go lucky magic commander happy. Punish them. And the other way to win with this commander would be your commander damage, going into attack with Storm and capitalizing on certain criteria that you might have. So, without further ado, let's share these win cons. My favorite here is Comet Storm for 2 red and X. It is an instant. That's the only reason why I like this spell more than the other ones, such as Crackle with Power, Fireball, etc. This is an instant, okay? It has multi-kicker 1. You may pay an additional 1 mana any number of times as you cast a spell. Choose any target, then choose another target for each time this spell was kicked. Comet Storm deals X damage to each of them. So yes, generically, when you cast this with a high storm count, this is a giant fireball, and you do, this 3 times because you have a storm count of 2. Cool. The reason why I'm putting this in the deck is because it's instant speed, because you never know when a player needs to be eliminated. And instant speed is the answer. So I like to think of an example. You pass your turn, players are expecting you to do a high storm count, and you just couldn't, or you just didn't want to, right? So you're on another player's turn, they go to attack, they take that player down to 6 life. Bam, Comet Storm, here it comes, slap down, tap a total of 8 mana. That player who was at 6 life is eliminated. That's why I like this instant speed spell. And yes, you're in green, so you better have some ramp spells in there. Oh, well, excuse me. There are ramp spells in the deck, and there are ritual spells in this deck. So you could generate 6 mana, actually a total of 8 mana, pretty quickly on other players' turns. On to the next. Actually, my favorite card here. This is the card that I was talking about. One of my favorite cards ever, because it's one of those cards that players get comfortable doing something that they love to do, which is draw cards. You've seen that player that has a Jenga Taxis and they draw extra 7 cards, or a Ristic Study and everybody couldn't, pay the 1. Whatever bull jive that happened, Gaze of Adamaro punishes them. For 4 mana, it's another instant. Gaze of Adamaro deals damage equal to the number of cards in target player's hand to that player. So, on the bonus side, if a player has 7 cards in their hand, and you are on your turn and you attack with Storm with a high Storm count of 2 or 3, and that player has 7 cards in their hand, you essentially could do 21 damage. That's pretty cool, right? Yeah. Otherwise, on an instant speed turn, a player just got done playing some crazy spell to draw all these cards, because there are those, I cannot think of that red, black, green commander that forces players to draw cards. What's his name? Put it in the comments below. I cannot think of it. You know, the one that makes players draw cards and you take 1 damage for drawing cards? That guy. Yeah, Gaze of Adamaro is his arch enemy, because there's going to be a player that's going to draw extra 5 cards, and they're going to have 10 cards in their hand. Bam, you can do 10 damage to them. Easy kill. Yes. World Souls Rage. A brand new card from Karlov's Manor. Something along those lines. For X, red, green, those are Gruul colors. Sorcery speed, that's okay. World Souls Rage deal X damage to any target. Put up to X land cards from your hand and or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. So, in this Spellslinger deck, you're going to be playing a lot of spells. You want to play as many spells as possible. You want your graveyard filled with cards that you played, right? Don't be this is my thing. When you are a Spellslinger, you should not be afraid of having 1 creature on the battlefield and playing a bunch of cards from your hand at instant speed, at sorcery speed. You are comfortable taking damage, preventing damage, protecting your commander. You should have the perspective of your opponents don't know what to expect if they attack you. Once you get to that point where they grimace, they decide what they're going to do on an attack turn to really do some kind of damage to you, and they kind of just attack somebody else, that's when you become a Spellslinger. That fear where your opponents are just like, I don't want to lose my board state for no reason. Like, that's what happens when you're a Spellslinger. You blow up something that stops the trigger. You blow up all their creatures instantly. You just doing all this stuff on their turn, and they just feel remorse for just deciding to attack you. That's what you want to do. Sorry for veering off. Anyway, World Source Rage is ideally, once you have a high storm count, you get to deal damage to any target, preferably your opponents. Imagine if you can do this 3 times and you could do 5 damage. That means you could do 15 damage total and put up the 5 cards from your hand, oh, actually 15 cards from your hand and graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. This is a very good late game card, mid game card, probably after you've done a bunch of wheeling in this deck, because that's what I have in this deck tech, a bunch of wheels. And you get to put all those lands back into play, allowing you on your next turn to have a bigger board state. Imagine having 5 more mana, 12 mana, 16 mana. You're able to cast more spells for a higher storm count. Yeah, this is a win. Shout out to Carlos Manor for making this card in this set. On to the next cards. Okay, so back to attacking with commander damage. That is another way you're going to win with this deck, because you want to take advantage of her flying and vigilance. That means she can go over creatures without flying, or creatures without flying can't block her. And you don't tap to attack, so you always have at least one blocker. However, we want a high storm count to capitalize on the card Seize the Day, which is an extra combat spell for 4 mana sorcery. Untap target creature. It's okay, you can untap a creature that is already untapped. After this main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. Oh man, so you cast this after you deal damage with Storm Force of Nature. Not only do you get an extra combat phase, you get an extra main phase, allowing you to cast more spells to increase the storm count. Oh man, then more attack phases and a more main phase. This card goes bonkers. Actually, the best part about this card is the ability Flashback for only 3 mana. It's a little expensive card, but for 3 mana to have Flashback, so even if you discard this because all the wheeling that you will be doing, you get to have this card accessible. Accessible. New players, I like to tell you that graveyard does not mean the end of your hand. Graveyard is an extension of your hand. There's cards that allow you to come back to life, I should say, from your graveyard, or actually better from your graveyard, or need to be in your graveyard to actually be accessible and playable during the game. You know how many times cards have abilities in graveyards that you actually don't read your opponent's graveyard, and they purposely don't tell you? One of my favorite cards is Wonder, the blue creature that gives all creatures flying if it's in the graveyard. Or Anger, it gives all creatures haste. Be careful and always read your opponent's graveyard, because that is one thing you definitely need to eliminate from an opponent's play style, is their graveyard. So, I need to talk about commander damage, right? I'm going to start off with Candlekeep Inspiration. This card is going to need to be played before your combat damage with Storm. For 5 mana, it's a sorcery. It says until end of turn, creatures you control have base power and toughness XX, where X is the number of cards you own in exile and in your graveyard, and or in that are instant cards, sorcery cards, or have an adventure. This card is really good, especially late game, and after all the wheel effects that you have done. If there is a combination of 10 instant or sorcery cards in your graveyard, which most likely there is, and it only gets better late game, and you've been discarding cards in your graveyard, this is actually even better, because there's cards that you exiled, probably through Arcane Bombardment or Valakut Inspiration, that you get to capitalize on. So you make Storm probably like a 12/12. Easily. Easily. Remember, you don't want this card with a you don't want this card to have Storm. You want to use this card to add to the Storm count. Okay? So remember, play this card before you attack with Storm. Now, we're going to the right-hand side. Intercom, Outer Strength. I just love the flavor text of this card. I gotta read it for y'all. The ghostly objects around the kami circle faster and faster, creating a dizzying cyclone of motion. When it opened its eyes, it struck. Doesn't that sound like an old karate flick? Like Enter the Dragon, One Punch Man? I mean, IP Man? IP Man was fire. Don't act like I didn't see that. Anyway, this is a 3 mana instant. It says target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand. Remember, In this Spellslinger deck, you want cards in your hand. Do not underestimate the count of 4. Plus 4 is a lot, players. Uh, this card is really good if you have additional combat phases. So, you know, like I described, Seize the Day, and you cast this after Seize the Day on one of those additional main phases, then you attack with Storm again, you just increase this Storm count. So that just gets ugly for your opponents. But generally, you can add this to the Storm count, or, if you had that additional combat phase, plus 4 with a Storm count of 5, that's 20, plus 20, plus 20. That's game. Easy. Got my Starbucks here. That's how dedicated I am, y'all. Here we go. Surge to Victory for 6 mana sorcery. Exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. Easy to do because you're playing instants and sorcery spells. Creatures you control get +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is that card's mana value. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, copy the exile card. You may cast a copy without paying this mana cost. So the last 2 cards I showed you, this card I showed you, it buffs all your creatures. So all your creatures get a power boost, right? So ideally, you would like to exile the highest CMC, but don't underestimate a 5 CMC spell, because what makes this card good is you get to cast a copy of that spell. So if it is a time warp, which allows you to have an additional turn, imagine giving your creature +5/+0 and taking an extra turn. Guess how much mana you pay for that? 6. This card gets kind of crazy, depending on what you kind of do. Ideally, you would like to cast this card before you attack with Storm and add this to the Storm count. But this card gets really good if you have additional combat phases with Seize the Day, and you cast this on the additional main phases, and ultimately giving this a Storm count. So on that second combat phase, it has a Storm count of 3, and you get to exile another card, maybe another turn burn spell. I don't know. It's up to you. So Surge to Victory is a very good card to add. I won't spend too much time on these cost reducers because they are mandatory in any Spellslinger deck. You always want to reduce the mana cost of a spell, especially red-blue, because I feel like that color scheme is not able to generate mana at a faster pace compared to other colors. So it definitely needs to take advantage of each turn. Goblin Electromancer is a staple. Stormcatch Mentor, I actually like that name. It's an otter with a rod. Yeah. He does the same thing. Instant source spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Primal Amulet, y'all seen this card before. I think it's like a $5 card, but it's well worth it. I just think it has a high CMC cost. So generally, if you play this, it might end your turn. You might get off 1 spell. So I actually don't put this in my deck a lot. I stick with the little guys for 2 CMC because I know they're on the board and I get that 1 extra spell. Maybe that ramp spell that's at 3 CMC and it's down to 2, which allows me to cast another ramp spell from 2 mana also. You see what I'm saying here? So in this deck tech, you'll also see like very low CMC, encouraging you to play those spells. I'm not going to spend too much time on these cards either. Y'all know what these do. These are the staple cards for Storm Force of Nature to increase the storm count. Right here in the middle, we have Slip Through Space for 1 blue mana. It has Devoid, which means this card has no color. Target creature can't be blocked this turn, draw a card. Awesome, right? That's probably the first card you're going to play to get the storm count up, then make Storm unblockable in case a player has a blocking creature that flies. Then you play another spell, you make that Storm count of 2. I'm keeping the math simple. Math is simple. Y'all know what these cards do. I'm moving on. Okay, so now we are on the wheel package here. Spellslingers, do not be afraid to cast spells. That is the worst thing a spellslinger could do, is not cast spells. Don't regret playing spells. The more you're random or the more calculated you are, the more fear you put in your opponent's hand, I should say. Corvus Fury on the left-hand side for 5 mana is a sorcery, a great card to have a high storm count. It says for each player, choose friend or foe. Each friend discards all cards from their hand and draws that many cards plus 1. Ideally, you want to choose yourself as a friend. Corvus Fury deals damage to each foe equal to the number of cards in their hand. If a player has 5 cards in their hand and you have a storm count of 3, they will be taking 15 damage. Woo-wee. Remember, if you choose yourself as a friend, you'll be discarding your hand 3 times and drawing that many cards of the cards that you had before. Cool. Moving on to Windfall. 3 mana, this is a blue staple sorcery. Each player discards their hand and draw cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So we're taking advantage of the player with the highest cards in their hand. We always look for that player that has 7 cards in their hand. 7? Ooh, that's gravy, right? Gravy. So that means all other players will draw 7 cards. That's okay. The reason why I'm trying to tell you that it's okay to do that, I think a lot of new players are hesitant to give new players new hands because you feel like it could put you behind. Don't worry about all that time. You're playing your deck. You're trying to do what you want to do. And honestly, sometimes eliminating a player's hand is probably one of the best things you could do because they had the combo pieces or the setup cards that they needed in their hand and they were planning to put down on the battlefield. You just eliminated that for 3 mana and you got a set of new cards in hand. It's a win-win at the right time. Okay, so we're back to the card draw package. Step Between Worlds for 5 mana is a sorcery. It says each player may. Whenever it says may, you have the choice to do it or not to do it. So each player may shuffle their hand and graveyard into their library. Each player who does draw 7 cards. Exile Step Between the Worlds. So I have to tell you, this card is not that good if you use it with a high storm count because you can only shuffle your graveyard and hand to your library realistically 1 time. Okay, but why this card is good? Because it has plot 6. Okay, plot 6 says you may pay 6 mana and exile this card from your hand. Cast it as a sorcery on a later turn without paying its mana cost. Play only at sorcery speed. So, excuse me. My bad, I was talking too fast. So, the reason why I like this card, because I referenced in another video a bunch of plot and foretell abilities on cards. With Storm, you want to do that because you want to set up that explosive turn. This is a great card to reset your entire hand and reposition all those cards in your graveyard back into your library, allowing you to have those cards possibly once again. Do not underestimate that ability. Okay, that's why this card is good. Mid-game type of feel, or even like as soon as possible, where you just have a bad hand. And think about this card from a defensive perspective too. Players have cards in their hand, and somebody's just ahead, meaning they are building their board state, and they look like they caught fire, they caught a groove. You can eliminate that. You really can by putting their hand back into the library, and they got to draw a new 7, and possibly they just get nothing but mana, and they can't do anything. You've played enough games, probably in your first 50, where like you've seen your deck like that perfect flow. It's something about you got that perfect flow of cards, mana, spells, permanents. Like, yo, you're just rocking. Then all of a sudden, somebody plays a windfall. This is almost along those same lines from a defensive point of view. Next up on the right here, we have Whirlpool Warrior. For 3 mana, a 2/2 Merfolk Warrior. When Whirlpool Warrior enters the battlefield, shuffle the cards from your hand into your library. Draw that many cards. A great card just to get rid of cards in your hand and replenish your hand. Like, for 3 mana, that's almost like a windfall for you specifically. All right, when it's on the battlefield, tap a red mana, sacrifice it. Each player shuffles the cards from his or her hand into his or her library, then draws that many cards. Key thing here. Players may not know this. You can block sacrifice. So let's say an opponent attacks you with a 5/5. You can block with Whirlpool Warrior, tap a red mana, and use this ability. And you still block that creature. You can block sacrifice. I think that's a pro tip right there for players. Block sacrifice. So essentially, you're able to prevent damage and get the ability off. Just remember, it cannot say only at sorcery speed. This Whirlpool Warrior does not say that. You just tap a red mana, and each player shuffles the cards from his or her hand into his or her library, then draw that many cards. What's awesome about this card is essentially 2 windfalls for you. Because if you don't like your hand the first time when it comes into play, after you got a new set, you could tap another red mana. It's a total of 4 mana, and you can get a whole new set of hands, or set of cards for a hand. You see what I'm going here. Now, these 4 cards coming up, they're actually the same cards that I had in the previous Storm Force of Nature. I'm not going to talk about them too much. These are the cards that you want to have a high storm count with, because these are your one-sided wheel effects, preferably for you. Weight of Memory, 5 mana. Sorcery Speed, draw 3 cards. Target player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. That is good for you because you have cards that have flashback in this deck. Yeah. And you got cards that say shuffle your graveyard back into your library. So we're not worried about milling cards. We're just trying to get through our deck and see more possibilities of other cards. Next up, we got Urban Evolution on the right-hand side. 5 mana, sorcery, draw 3 cards. You play an additional land this turn. This card is really good because if you have a storm count of 2, you can do this a total of 3 times. That means you're drawing 9 cards and dropping a total of 4 mana on that one turn. 3 from this card, and 1 per turn. Next up, we got Plan the Heist and Eagle Vision. Plan the Heist for 4 mana, surveil 3. If you have no cards in hand, then draw 3 cards. To surveil, look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put any number of them into your graveyard and the rest on top of your library in any order. This is good for library manipulation. So essentially, you could, referencing these Seize the Day, drop it in your graveyard and put the other 2 cards back on top of your library. Then when you're ready for Seize the Day, you can cast it for its flashback cost. Also, this card has Plot 4. You may pay 4 mana and exile this card from your hand. Cast it as a sorcery on a later turn without paying its mana cost. Then once again, you're setting up your turns. Storm Force of Nature, making this a bad re-re. Okay, Eagle Vision on the right-hand side. 5 mana, sorcery, free running ability. Tap 2. On blue and 1, you may cast a spell for its free running cost if you dealt combat damage to a player this turn with an assassin or commander. Storm Force of Nature is your commander. Flying Vigilance, pretty easy to attack and swing and deal damage. Draw 3 cards. If you have a storm count of 2, you do this 3 times. So you are drawing 9 cards just for attacking with that commander and getting damage. Win-win. Teferi's Ageless Insight for 4 mana is a legendary enchantment. This is going to go well with all those cantrips that we have in the deck where it says target creature can't block this turn and draw a card. Essentially, Teferi's Ageless Insight allows you to draw 2 cards every time you play a 1 mana cantrip. Ha! That's great. And even on your first turn, except for your first card you draw on each turn. Let me read the card here. If you would draw a card except the first one you draw on each of your turns, draw 2 cards instead. So pretty much every card past your first card on your first turn, you get to draw 2. And also, when a card says draw 3 cards, you're realistically drawing 1 card, 1 card, 1 card. So Teferi's Ageless Insight says, hey, for that 1 card, you draw 2. For that 1 card, you draw 2. For that 1 card, you draw 2. That's a total of 6 cards when it says draw 3. Pro tip. Now, I'm not going to lie. This is the most exciting thing about this deck tech that I have for you. I discovered this card, and I feel like nobody's talking about this card, and it's probably a key card for all Storm Force of Natures. The reason why is, for example, this card on the left, Slip Through Space, is only 1 CMC. And remember, most Storm decks say you need that 1 drop CMC spell that makes Storm Force of Nature unblockable or can't be blocked, or flying, something along those lines, and draw a card, right? So the scenario happens, what happens if you don't have that card in your hand? But that card is somewhere in your deck, and you need that card for this turn. if you build your deck correctly, you could possibly get that card with this card on the right-hand side. And I put that in the deck list for you. On the right-hand side, we have Bloodbraid Marauder for 2 mana, a 3/1 body, human berserker. Bloodbraid Marauder can't block. We don't care. It has Delirium. It says this spell has Cascade as long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. So that means artifacts, creatures, instants, sorceries, enchantments, planeswalkers, lands. You'll have that in your graveyard because this is a wheel deck. Sub-theme wheel. So it has Cascade. Let me explain what Cascade is. When you cast a spell, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. Remember, this is a 2 CMC spell, and we'll be looking for a spell that only costs 1. Hence, Slip Through Space. That reminded me of Lost in Space, if you remember that show. Lost in Space. All right, Slip Through Space. So, when you Cascade, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. Put the exile cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. So what happens is you play Bloodbraid Marauder for 2 mana. You meet the Delirium requirements. You have 4 card types in your graveyard. Okay? And eventually, you exile all these cards until you find a Slip Through Space or the other one that says target creature can't be blocked this turn. So you actually get 2 Storm counts for 2 mana. Because Bloodbraid Marauder counts as a spell. Then Slip Through Space counts as a spell because you cast it this turn without paying its mana cost. This is a secret deck tech. This is what makes Magic great. When you find mechanics and they're just they're like the gamble card or the utility card that wasn't even meant for the deck. Like most players don't even see this. So when you play this spell, players are gonna be looking at you like, why are you cascading with this? What are you putting in your deck? Oh, bam, Slip Through Space. Storm can't be blocked. Oh, you happen to win the game because you already got a Storm count of 2 for 2 mana. That's very valuable here. Play another spell, do damage with Storm. Ooh, that's a Storm count of 3, and whatever that 4th spell you play, you're gonna do damage, player. Easy as that. Easy as that. But don't leave me yet. I got another great card for you. Colossus Sky Turtle for 7 mana, 2 green, blue, and 4 mana, 6/5 enchantment creature turtle. That is 2 types, an enchantment and a creature. It has Flying Warrior 2. But where this card shines is the channel ability, and it has 2 channel abilities. That's nasty. So you can do channel abilities at any time. Instant speed, anytime. So tap 3 mana, discard Colossus Sky Turtle, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. That's really good. At instant speed, on like let's say a player made you mill a card, you're able to tap 3 mana if this card is in your hand and put it into your hand. What? This card is crazy. Okay, next up we have Channel for 2, a blue and a 1. Discard Colossus Sky Turtle, return target creature to its owner's hand. That's good too, because you could bounce Storm Force of Nature when a player goes for a board wipe or tries to remove Storm Force of Nature. They're going to be very disappointed that you bounce your own creature back to your hand. And the benefit of bouncing your own creature back to your hand is the card is in your hand and you do not have to pay the commander tax. So essentially, you got a possibility of playing your commander twice without paying that 2 extra mana, eliminating a turn. Because realistically, a 4 mana commander is expensive. That's expensive nowadays. So when you go to 6 mana just to cast your commander, that is a very taxing turn. Like you're losing a turn. But being able to cast your commander 2 times for 4 mana, it's just simple math. You played your mana at a reduced rate. So bouncing your own creature to your hand is a win. And also use this as a defensive purpose. Let's say a player is going to attack you with something crazy, right? Return target creature to his owner's hand. You pay 2 mana, and you put this creature card in your graveyard. Colossus Sky Turtle is literally 2 cards It's 3 cards in one, 2 abilities, 2 abilities at instant speed on 1 card. It's super versatile. Auto include. Auto include. I'm not gonna lie, the end of the video is actually the best part because these are new cards that I found that go with my Spellslinger type of thought. And they are they're mostly removal spells. So you'll see that in the deck list. First up, we got Breakdown. And some of these spells you can use with a high high storm count, and you get multiple effects. So Breakdown for 3 mana, instant, destroy target artifact or enchantment, create a junk token. That is awesome. Being able to have this with a storm count of 2, you get to destroy 3 artifacts or enchantments and create 3 junk tokens. And essentially, you tap the junk token, and I believe you pay 1, and you exile the top card of your library. You may do this only at sorcery speed. So this is like impulse draw, and you never know what cards you need to see. Impulse draw, I think, is a very great mechanic because it's a lower cost to see a card for that turn. And sometimes that turn is all you need. That's the good thing about Magic and the color red. You're gambling, like the red card gamble, to see that 1 card. But that's the turn you can win the game. So don't be afraid to play like that. Next up, we have Paw Patch Formation for 2 mana. It says choose 1. Destroy target creature with flying, destroy target enchantment, draw a card, create a food token. Like I said, if you got a storm count of 2, you get to do this 3 times. You get to do a total of these 3 times. Uh, Pretty versatile, You get rid of creatures that are very powerful, a bunch of demons or angels because they have flying. Powerful enchantments like Painful Quandary, uh, you know, Neverwielding Dreams, whatever. Or you can make this a draw spell. Draw 3 cards and create food tokens. And food tokens allow you to gain life. So if you got 3 food tokens, that's a total of 9 life you can possibly gain. Next up, we got Crack Open. It's another 3 mana sorcery speed. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Create a treasure token. Storm count of 2. You get to do this 3 times. Create 3 treasure tokens to destroy a total of up to 3 artifacts or enchantments. Another great spell. You get the ramp. Nothing wrong with ramp. You'll be surprised how 1 treasure token can be game changing. You're able to cast that 1 extra spell because you had that 1 extra mana from a treasure token versus a land drop. Don't underestimate the power of 1. By far, this is my favorite card here. Megaton's Fate, because it sounds like Megatron from Transformers. For 6 mana sorcery, I definitely want to do this with a high storm count. It says choose 1, disarm, destroy target artifacts, create 4 treasure tokens. That's crazy right there. Also has Detonate. Megaton's Fate deals 8 damage to each creature. Each player gets 4 rad counters. Love the flavor text. Do the right thing or the wrong thing. So, obviously, the disarm ability is awesome. You can, with a high storm count of 2, you get to do this 3 times. Destroy 3 artifacts and create 12 treasure tokens. That's great. 12 treasure tokens. Next up, you got Detonate. So, this is a board wipe, right? Deal 8 damage 3 times. That's, 8 times 3 is 24 damage to each creature. Okay, cool. You could do that. But each player gets 4 rad counters. I gotta go back and rad counters is from the Fallout set, and I believe that makes player mills and you lose life. Y'all gotta help me out with this. Put that in the comment section below. What do rad counters do? Okay. It's actually a very powerful effect, and I actually have a video on it with the Mothman. I just can't think of rad counters right now. All right, we made it to the end of this video. I do have the deck list in the description below, so feel free to check it out. Let me know what you think about it. This is Spellslinger Focus. You will be holding a bunch of cards in your hand and playing those cards, and they will be a bunch of removals. And at the same time, you have these set up to go with your win cons, which is either commander damage or these big burn spells that take advantage of a player's low life or big hands. That's what I love about this commander. when you play Spellslinger, don't be afraid to cast the spells. And this deck wants you to play wheels. You want to get rid of your hand and get new cards. It's okay to have your opponent lose their hand and get new cards. Keep them on the edge. You'll be surprised how powerful wheel effects are against your opponents because they had a good hand and they don't have a good hand all of a sudden. All for 3 mana and you still have your turn. And when you play Storm Force of Nature and you do wheel effects and you do this to add to your storm count, imagine the card that you were looking for that you needed to play for that storm count. Yes, that's where this gets addicting to play because you're just, I can't say the word gambling, but you're gambling with your deck, but you're just like flowing with your deck. That's the key thing about this. You're playing spells, you're untapping lands, you're casting spells, you're seeing the abilities and effects. All these effects get very addicting and just want to layer effects upon effects upon effects. Storm is a fun commander to play with. If you love the video, make sure you like it. If you're new to the video, new to the channel, make sure you subscribe so I can bring you more content like this. Thank y'all very much. Peace out.